Broadcasting live. It's America's longest running talk show on computers. It's Computer America, bringing you the biggest names in technology with guest interviews, new products, and your emails. Listen live at computeramerica.com on any device around the world. Email the show at live@computeramerica.com or find us on social media. Be sure to check out our website for contests, giveaways, show notes, live video stream, podcasts, and more. You're listening to Computer America.
Hello and welcome into the Computer America Show. We are the nation's longest running, nationally syndicated radio talk show on computers and technology. Thank you for joining us. I'm your host, Ben Crossman, and we have a great show planned for you today where we, in the second part of the show, will be doing computer and technology news as much as time allows. But in the first segment, that's the really exciting part, we have a guest, and that guest, he's been on the show before. Looking forward to talking again, but you may not have heard the company Advanced Solutions, and this is going to be heavily in the cybersecurity, cyber defense, that kind of thing, and I could think of no one better to to talk about this, and especially ahead of the elections. So with that being said, why don't we go ahead and talk about a couple things, and then bring on our guest. So first thing first, computeramerica.com. That's where you'll find everything for today's show, be it, any show notes, a link to our guest website, any videos, just anything and everything that we do on the program today will be in the show notes as we do them. The second thing will, of course, be computeramerica.com, and we have the live video stream, which you can also find over at twitch.tv/computeramerica. Find that there, very, very easy. And the last thing is the social media contest brought to you by Logitech. Enter to win fabulous prizes. All right, all that and more at computeramerica.com. But without further ado, let's just jump right into this. So as I said before, Advanced Solutions, and joining us once again is Mr. Sean Galliher. He is the CEO of the company, and he's here to tell us all about what they do and also get into current events. So Sean, welcome back onto Computer America. How have you been? How are you doing?
I'm doing good, and how have you been?
Doing fantastic, and happy to have you back on because a couple of these stories are just, the more that certain fields change, like cybersecurity, cyber defense, that kind of thing, the more they stay the same, and that's going to make more sense as we go through. But before we go any further, let's talk about Advanced Solutions and a bit of your background for people who may not know. Give us some background.
So I've been in information systems for 37 years, I think. It's at this point, I can't remember how long. Advanced Solutions is one of my original companies. I've got a few of them. It's been open for almost 20 years at this point. They provide all different types of support, from security to configuration of networks to everything in between. But we do focus a lot on making sure that our clients are secure, and that's one of the forefronts of what we try to do.
Right. Yeah, and obviously that can be very challenging because however much time, effort, and energy that you spend on developing this kind of technology, they spend just as much effort making sure to circumvent what it is that you're doing. So let's, and as I said before the show, why don't we go ahead and start with some specifics because you are so well versed in this, and then we'll kind of branch out into best usage and practices and that kind of thing. Why don't we go ahead and start with this article I found I believe it came out yesterday or the day before. I don't quite recall, but I'm wondering if you kind of caught this one. But someone who worked for the U.S. Geological Survey team was caught browsing some websites that you should totally not browse at work. And this was found by the Inspector General of the Interior. And essentially, I wanted your comment on the idea that when you think government, you think very secure. They have tons of protocol in place, more so than you would assume. I think of the private sector, and yet something very basic as someone was downloading pornography at work on their work computer while they were working for the government. They couldn't follow that simple rule, which should be common sense. What did you think about the U.S. Geological Survey team? They didn't do basic things like lock down USB ports, and they also didn't restrict websites, I think was the other thing that they kind of recommended. Is this surprising to you? Or, maybe working with companies, you say, you try your best and, sometimes T's don't get crossed. What do you think about that?
Well, there's a spectrum of security ideas out there and influences, but you're only as secure as your weakest link, and that's what a lot of people don't really understand. I wrote a little article called "The Red Zone," and really this is where all this stuff goes to, because it's much better if someone's going to invite you into their house than to have to break into it. And that's really where all this stuff has gone for the last probably 10 years, is they've let people invite them into the network. They didn't need to break into it. They let them invite in there. And when you go out to questionable websites, and that's what these websites are. They're out there as clickbait to an extent, just like a lot of other websites that are non-pornography, but they're still clickbait. You click on the site, and next thing you know, someone's in a spot where they probably shouldn't be, where something's either trying to download them or hack them or something like that. And and that's out there. But you also have to, especially the government, and we'll talk a little bit about what the government does, close to this. You also, as a government agency, have to understand that you're entrusted with not only your own security, but the security of the American public. A lot of times these systems have information on it that is only information that the government should have and does have. Social security numbers, where you live, those type of things. Those are a lot of those type of things are things that the government only has. So they have to be especially mindful of what they do. And although you cannot really restrict someone can find a way around almost any type of restriction out there that, to get to any website they want to go to. There should be some type of alarms and alerts within inside of the government to say, hey, listen, this person has went to a bad place, and immediately shut their system down or end up in a situation where you block them off the network so they can't infect anything else, and that you localize the situation. And that's what people don't understand. I've had companies literally that will leave malware on their systems because they don't want to either pay for it to come off, or they don't even think about it, and they'll leave it on there for weeks.
Yeah, and that's not good, right? Like that's one malware begets a lot of malware, right?
Yeah, by and large, what happens a lot of times is malware, and it depends upon. I mean, you have different types of. You got everything from the benign stuff that basically wants to sell you new shoes, to the more intrusive stuff that wants to pull data off your system, and everything in between. So, you have those type of things sitting on your network, and I would venture a guess and say almost every network out there has some form of malware on it. A lot of it's just benign stuff that's popping up in your browser, and when you look at things like Google, you could really classify a lot of stuff they do as malware. If they're taking your information, which they do, and they're trying to manipulate the browser to put you into a better, to put you to their sponsors, they're really affecting your searches. And that's where all this stuff comes into play, and that's why we have to really be mindful of how this stuff works out. And more than that, we have to be mindful of that as it goes to, when we're dealing with the government.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of these large companies are the people that are generating software connections and everything else for the government, so they have to be somewhat beyond reproach.
Right. Yeah. And to dig a bit further into the story, they said that they did find, I guess the Inspector General has, especially for work computers and work phones, they are able to confiscate them and scan them. And yeah, they found that the malware that was on the laptop and the phone was, let's see, the malware, quote, helps enable data exfiltration, and it also is associated with ransomware attacks. So, end quote. So that, it showed that he felt comfortable doing this because, no one was really monitoring. There was no kind of access to, or, no one was really paying attention that, hey, this person visited, and I believe I'm quoting here, thousands of websites over the course of a couple months at work. Man, to have that job. But he felt comfortable doing it. And at the same time, there wasn't any kind of immediate reaction. It's not like his computer was, bricked, but rather it became this, to use a phrase, it became a Trojan horse of viruses that if he ever hooked it up to a system that was, thankfully not as crucial as the Department of the Interior, but, something more, like you said, social security numbers or anything else, that government device suddenly becomes a very dangerous tool that, no one else is going to know about because no one else is really paying attention. Our services, I believe your services does this as well with, you do IT consulting and things like that. How common is it for, I know in some places that kind of monitor web traffic and things like that. I mean, is it just too costly for a small, medium business? Government, is it just too large of an entity to really monitor it like that? I'm sorry, I guess I'm trying to ask, are these basic steps that they messed up, or is this just impossible to keep up with?
Well, and something to someone for like the Department of Interior or someone like that, they obviously should have known within minutes that this person was doing stuff like that. I find it hard to believe that they're spending, billions of dollars on IT stuff, and they don't know that someone's doing it. So I think someone dropped the ball on that scenario. For the smaller businesses, I think that you have two realms to look at this. You can either put policies in place to prevent these type of things, or you can have a constant situation where you're constantly looking over the shoulders of your employees to see exactly what they're doing. And I think that that's where a lot of this stuff falls down, is that, simple policies of saying this is what you can and can't do, and here's the repercussions of what you can and can't do. I think those would stop a lot of this type of, stuff that goes on. But a lot of people don't even think about that. I'm dealing with a company now, that's just growing by leaps and bounds, and I think they're 30 or 40 employees at this point. Mm-hmm. And I spoke to them. I said, now is the time that you need to put in IT policies. It would have happened better if you would have done it earlier, but we just started interacting with them recently. And I said, now is the time to do it, because when you get larger, it's difficult to put those type of things in and people to follow them. And simple policies like that, even if you have 5 people to say, hey, listen, this is what you can and can't do on your work computer. This is what we will tolerate and we won't. We may tolerate for you to go out to, to check your email, but we're not going to tolerate for you to lounge on Facebook all day long. So, that's a real problem that comes with every type of business, large and small, is what policies are you going to implement? And that's where you have to start, because if you want electronically it to watch you electronically, mm-hmm. then you're going to talk about putting in another system, and any system is going to be an expense.
Right.
These are simple things you can do without any real expense except for spend a few hours, kind of going through what you think should happen and shouldn't happen.
No, makes perfect sense, and I think that's really, I guess, like you said, the policies and the technology was probably in place to catch the civil servant from doing what he was doing at work, but it was more the education. It was more, his oversight, or even himself just knowing not to do that on his work phone, on his work laptop. Really, education would have, made that whole situation not happen if if they had just followed the policies that were in place. So makes perfect sense. And so that was the first story. And I kind of want to transition because it's government to government, but I've been seeing articles pop up every now and again, and I'm sure that you've seen them as well. But the idea that the election is coming up, and there have been a number of talks about the authenticity of voting machines and the security of voting machines and voting electronically and that kind of thing. And I wanted your opinion on if governments and I guess, local elections and election officials, are we prepared to still use voting machines? Because there's been a lot of callback to, why don't we just go back to pen and paper? Pen and paper works so well. Why do we bother with voting machines? Are voting machines secure, I guess, as far as you see it?
Well, so, you have to look at a couple things here, and this is where people kind of don't really think about things, is that there is voting machines, and there is the electronic side, and there's the physical side. So the electronic side, everyone knows about hacking through a firewall or doing malware or something like that, and getting involved with doing those type of things. And those are not really as much of a concern because of the decentralization of our voting system. You have to remember that all of these counties and some cities have their own election commission that decides what voting machines they're going to use and how they're going to use it. For a hacker, that's a very tough thing to do, to try and figure out exactly who's using what, because you're going to have different protocols and different ways that you deal with things depending upon what system's in place. So you may have hundreds of thousands of voting machines and tens of thousands of compilers out there that are compiling the votes out there to hack into, and there may be hundreds of different systems out there. So, one of the things that our prior president said, which was actually true, is he said it's very difficult to hack a U.S. election, and it is. Because you're talking about, if you get into a voting machine, and say, for instance, that and you can go out to YouTube and see they can hack a voting machine in 10 minutes. Mm-hmm. They physically have to be there, and that's the physical part of it. They physically have to be there, but no one's going to go into a booth and spend 15, 20 minutes to hack a voting machine and no one not know.
Right.
They're going to look around and go, why has that guy been in the voting machine for 20 minutes? So you have that going on, plus you have your checks and balances, where you end up in a situation where if they have one voting machine with 1,000 people voting, and then they have one that has 100,000 people voting, they're going to look at that and go, wait a second, there's a problem here. But more than that, where I see the biggest problem with is that in these local election committees and stuff like that, you really don't have anyone that understands technology a lot of times. And not in all cases, but in a lot of cases, you'll have someone that's got that position mainly either because they're the only ones that want to take the position, or that they're being appointed by someone. But they don't have a background in technology, yet they're making decisions on technology. That's where the problem comes in, is that they're having someone come from some voting software group and saying, here's what you need to buy. Now, that is where you can have issues and problems, because that software company that's generating these type of voting machines, at that point in time, that's where a hacker's going to want to hack. That's where they want to go in it, because now you don't have to physically take control of the machine. It's very easy when you embed something in the software or something like that, and there's tens of thousands of them going there. Now you can start to hack and affect the vote. That's where this really is the linchpin, the really easy, that's the easiest route to go, is to do something along that lines if you want to go in and infiltrate the things electronically. But when you're talking about all of these different types of systems, you're still talking about, the changing of a vote of, say, a national election. If there's, say, 10,000 votes that go one way or the other, whatever it is,
Mm-hmm.
or are not counted, that's probably not going to affect the presidential election. And that's one of the things that you got to look at, is really how are they going to affect that many votes. Where you can see the issue is when they compile these on a state level. Because at that point, you can hide 10,000 votes. You can end up in a situation where if you get 10,000 here and 10,000 there and 10,000 there, pretty soon it's 100,000. And you are affecting national elections like senators and congressmen and stuff like that.
Right.
And that's really where you see the place where people want to go into. And when you're talking about cybersecurity, you're talking about where you enter at. That's the first thing you want to know. Where do you enter at? Because if you enter too low, then you've wasted a lot of time and not got a lot of reward out of it. If you enter too high, then you have to deal with how much security you have. So, where I see the entry point being would be these software companies that are being decided on by people with really little or no technology background. And that's the problem we run into.
Yeah, but you would hope, I guess, you mentioned kind of at the county level, there's a very real possibility that not every county in this country has someone who is IT minded and they are going to be the best fit for that position. But I guess you kind of hope that at like a state level, you're right, the higher you go, the more security that you would hopefully employ. So I guess that's kind of the check there. Now, before we move on from election, I did want to say that over the 2016 elections, and there's been a lot of analysis on that, they keep using this term hacked. 2016 hacking, Russian hackers. I have always had kind of a little quibble with that, which is I think what they're referring to is the fact that that Russians were using Facebook and Google ads and Twitter as it was intended to be used for a subversion, for a different purpose. And they were pretending they were doing that, creating fake profiles. But that's and you can jump in on this, but that's not hacking, is it? Like, first of all,
that's exactly it. That's influencing using social media, and that happens on a daily basis. Whether you're influencing people to buy your product or whether you're influencing people to do bad things, that happens all the time in social media. That's one of the two-edged swords with social media. The good and the bad is you have both of those. But as for hacking, you're absolutely 100% correct. There was, on the technical side of things, there was no hacking when it comes to voting machines or anything, and no one has said that there is, although they throw that a term around loosely about Russian hacking and this hacking and that hacking, and it does frustrate me too, because I want to step back and go, that's not hacking. That has nothing to do with it. But it's a buzz term that's used, and people react to it. Oh my God, they're hacking, they're getting into, they're doing this, they're doing that. I think the closest thing, and I've said this before, and I'll say it again, I think the closest thing is when you talk about one of the DNC's chairman for Miss Clinton, when he gave up his password to malware or to someone that was basically sending him an email. When he did that was probably the closest you got to hacking. But again, I don't think that we are pointed in the right direction to really understand what's going on. We should be talking to Google, and that's what I was talking about initially, is that when you end up in a situation where you have government agencies and election people that are relying upon people like Google and Yahoo and Facebook and all these people out there, then we have to understand that there is a level of responsibility that we're giving these type of entities, and that may or may not be the best idea. And I think at that point in time, one of the persons that I would have loved to seen called in to understand what's going on, it would be someone from Google to have someone understand what happened with this Gmail. Is it what they call a phishing email, or was it a spear phishing email? Which is basically a spear phishing spear phishing email means that they were targeting one particular organization or person. A phishing email is just they're sending out, and whoever reacts to it, they're going to go after.
Right.
So, those things should be understood.
Yeah, and it's always funny because there was that one, and then if you classify that as hacking, which is a type of social engineering, but there was another case where I believe it was someone who made was doing like a podcast or something like that, and he essentially just said, "Hey, I'm so and so. Let me speak to the president." And within a matter of minutes, he was speaking to the president of the United States. And that's essentially, through email form instead of a phone call. It's the same thing. It was probably something along the lines of, "Hey, I'm so-and-so. I need access to your email to get so-and-so. Please give me your password." And he just sent it over. That influencing on social media, like you were talking about, all of it, again, wrapped up into that buzz phrase of Russian hacking or Chinese hacking or whatever, pick your entity that's going to hack you. This is still important to talk about, obviously, but I guess as, let's just take somewhat from Advanced Solutions, how would you best go about, kind of tackling this idea of influence or intrusion, spear phishing, what have you? I mean, is this the same thing like it was with the U.S. Geological Survey team? Is it just education at this point, or
it's a version of hacking, and it's been a version of hacking for 30 years, probably 20 years.
It will always
They've been
be,
doing
right?
it since the 80s. And what they would do in the 80s is they would call up someone, say at Bank of America, and they'd say, "Hey, I'm, this is the tech support company. I need to get your user ID and password." And they would give them that over the phone. There's some famous hackers that's exactly what they did and how they got involved with getting that. And it's an electronic version of that. But you always have to understand, and we always stress at Advanced Solutions and to our clients, that you need to understand who you're giving passwords to, not just give your passwords to anyone. And that's what I mean by policy, is those policies should be in place. And if you have a company, you should say, "Listen, your passwords are not to be given out to anyone." If a support person calls you, they should either know your password or they should have the ability to get beyond what they need. They shouldn't need your password unless they're physically there or something like that. Those type of things. So you can put those policies in place, and a lot of companies don't. So you have your weakest link, which could be the person at the front desk, could be the person in the back room that is answering the phone call, and they say, "Hey, this is Sean from technical support. Can you give me your username and passwords?" And they go, "Oh, sure, here it is." And that's the problem you run into. That's why I said you need to have people inside of the government, inside of companies and everything else that understand technology to some extent to sit there and say, "Yeah, okay, I know this isn't the right way to do things." And that's where a lot of this stuff falls down.
Yep, and I think the last case before we switch off of election, that kind of thing, there was another article that was talking about the Texas e-voting machines, and this is probably something that you run into more often than I think we've ever mentioned. But the e-voting machines, they were talking about how they were switching votes, and that's a different kind of security. Making sure that these voting machines are accurate and that kind of thing. But it turns out that it was simply faulty software where it was trying to populate the voting list. If you were trying to, you hit one and it would autocomplete a couple different forms, and people were just hitting it and expecting instantaneous responses, but instead, and so when they went forward, it auto-filled the wrong choices. And it looked like the voting machines were changing records, but actually it was just faulty software. I guess that happens a lot too. I'm not saying that's a zero-day vulnerability or anything. It's just what is actually hacking and what is sometimes just bad software.
And that is the biggest concern, I think, to U.S. elections, is that whether the software that's being purchased actually does what it's supposed to do. And I think that's where you can see the largest effect going on. And whether the company does it intentionally or doesn't, it doesn't really matter. The same effect is comes to fruition.
Yeah.
When you end up in a situation where you're ending up that, for instance, if you put an algorithm that says every time this box is checked, these two boxes are checked also, which may not always be the case. That's the problem that you run into, is that there's all these algorithms that are running through these voting scenarios. Like, for instance, if you say that you're a Republican or a Democrat, it will only bring up the Republican or Democrat stuff in the primary, the people in the primary. Things like that. If that's screwed up, that says, okay, if you're a Republican or a Democrat, and it ends up that that's not your state policy, or that's not what your county policy is, maybe you have an open election in which you can vote for anyone, then those things have a tendency to affect, and that's one of the things that I believe in, and I think that is the problem when you don't have election officials that understand electronics and IT and everything else, and can put their policies and their laws and everything else with those and say, yes, this will fulfill what we need to do. And that runs into anything. That runs into your policies that inside of a company, and it doesn't necessarily just have to be security. It can be across the board. Allowing people to do certain things, post on Facebook. There's some companies that are just fine with that, and some companies that look at that and go, no, we don't want to do that. So you're going to have to look for systems that will stop that, or have a policy in place to stop that.
Right. So, and I think that was, kind of everything, kind of government related. I mean, cybersecurity, it obviously continues to be a very, very hot topic, but at the same time, the news cycle moves so fast where, one company will be hacked, and then you wait 48 hours and no one's talking about it anymore. Unless there are any other topics that you wanted to discuss in terms of, kind of current events and security, I wanted to give you a chance to talk about Advanced Solutions and talk about, these different services you provide as just kind of a quick overview for anyone listening out there, and, maybe considering what a company such as yours is able to do. I thought we could, maybe in the next 5-10 minutes talk about, server repair, VoIP, cybersecurity, cloud services, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, so we provide a wide range of services, and one of the things that we are very much in depth with is we consider ourselves not really at Advanced Solutions, not really consulting, as more or less as a entity within inside your business, and we are truly an outsourcing type venue. That being said, we provide everything from security to server configurations to VoIP to you name it, and everything in between. Advanced Solutions, we've been a company for 20 years. We have clients that have dated back that far that we still have as clients. In fact, it's a rarity when we lose a client, which is kind of interesting. And part of it is because if you're not thinking of your IT systems, both security and everything else, all in one encompassing system, then you have a bunch of hacked up systems. You have security that's not talking to your servers. You have servers that are not responding to your clients. You have applications that aren't responding to any of that. So you want to always make sure that whatever you're doing, that you're looking at every aspect of your system, whether it is security or whether it's just a simple thing is installing a printer. They should all work together, and if you're not looking at that whole ball that says this needs to work together, then you're doing yourself a disservice, and sometimes you're ending up in a situation where you're basically trying to bail out a boat with a big hole in it. You're going to be constantly bailing. One of the things I want to touch on with security-wise is that you're right, it does move extremely fast, and it's interesting to see all of the things that happen out there security-wise. But we, I mean, this because you're involved in it. The things that scare me in security are the companies that are not saying anything. The ones that you hear about, people go, okay, and they really have to clean up their act and try and make everything correct. I mean, the Equifax things, we're still trying to figure out exactly how that's going to come out, but they have to clean that mess up. But it's the companies that are not saying things and the government entities that are not saying things that are happening. Those are the scary ones because we don't know what exactly is going on. And that's really the biggest problem you run into out there, is that most people don't realize that companies are hacked on a daily basis, that they're intruded, they're affected. There's decisions being made that they're not really privy to what's going on when it comes to their data. And we have to be very mindful going forward of how we treat our data and what we do with our data, because that's our data, and that's who you are. It's identity theft, which is if someone said, "Hey, listen, someone's going to use your Social Security card," people go, "Wow, that's identity theft." Mm-hmm. But also identity theft too is someone hacking in and pulling your information out and using it to market to you or something like that. That's somewhat of identity theft also, because they're ending up in a situation where they're knowing things about you personally that maybe you would never tell anyone, just maybe by your browsers or by whatever. And they know those things about you. So to me, all that whole thing is identity theft. When someone's not asking me a question, they're finding out electronically the answer to a question. That to me is not a good thing, and that's my thought.
Yeah, you are on the wrong internet then, because that is the business model of the internet. I mean,
I know.
Yeah, it really is a scary place, and even beyond that, we're seeing companies actually share data between one another, and not to get too tinfoil hat, but let's just say that there's so much data that can be. Even when they say things like we strip personally identifiable information, I think as well as anyone that there's really no such thing. Like, you can say, okay, we took Ben's name off of all this data, but if you really look at it and go, who else wakes up at 8:30 in the morning, has 2 cups of coffee, and does this, and does very Ben-specific things, and you can still identify someone even if you take away the quote-unquote identifiable information. Like, I don't know, protecting your data or just limiting the amount of data that is collected about you, there's not a whole lot of options. Like there's, things like DuckDuckGo and, different browsers and things. But to use the internet, I think as the average person is expected to use the internet, there's not a lot of ways to, restrict that flow of data, is there?
Well, no, there's not. And simple things like trying to turn GPS off on your Android phone or your iPhone. Most people think that they flip the GPS off and that's it. They're not tracking. They're not doing this and that and the other thing. That's absolutely false. They are tracking all that stuff. And I think it was a few weeks ago. I think maybe a few months ago, Google had to admit, yeah, we are actually tracking, even though you turned the GPS off. And Apple, I think, had to admit the same thing. So, and to me, that's personal information. If I decide that I'm going to go to Starbucks and get a coffee, or if I decide that I'm going to go to a supermarket and buy food, I don't. That's not anything that I'm ready to announce to Google or to Apple that's what I'm going to do. But they take that information anyways, and that's the problem that you're into, because on the security side of it, you got to also remember and think that all this information is being stored, and it's usually stored in one central location to an extent. And if someone hacks into that, what information do they have on you now? Now they know exactly when you leave your house in the morning. They may know who's in the house at that point in time. They may know all of this stuff. So that's the big concern I have, is those type of things, because these large companies, they really are pretty intrusive when it comes to your own personal data.
And luckily, they're only working with government organizations to identify you on the street. So, there's also a lot of interplay. And that's the fun thing about data, is that once you have it and once you turn it into something useful, it can be bought, sold, and shared freely. You keep mentioning the idea of your data. It's your data, but as opposed to something like, let's say, Europe. In America, whoever collects the data and turns it into usable data, whoever collects the data owns that data. It may be about you, but it's not yours. And that's very different from the European approach, which is, regardless of who has their hands on it or who collected it, it's still, let's say Ben, it's still Ben's data. Even though Microsoft may have it in their system, that's still Ben's data. And if Ben wants you to delete that, then that is Ben's right because it is his information. Again, very different than what we have here in the U.S., which I hope changes soon. I really do.
But you also have to remember that certain things like Google Apps and stuff like that, those are more and more being used by government entities.
Mm-hmm.
And that's part of the issue. I always caution people when they start talking about these things, because what you're doing is you're giving that large company more control of your life. I think that passing policies and stuff, to be quite honest with you, and I'm not a big policy person, but to pass policies to prevent companies from being able to utilize your data in any way possible is a good idea.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that when you're really talking about this, and if you really want a good read for anyone, sit down and read user policies and and everything else that you're having on your social media accounts. You'll realize that you really have no rights at all.
Yeah.
They can, it's always funny when people say, well, they blocked this person or they did this and that, and I always respond and say that's because it's their platform. They can do whatever the heck they want.
That's and that's I didn't even think that this would even come up in a related conversation, but a lot of let's say personalities and companies in the past couple of weeks have been shunned from places such as Facebook, Twitter, or other advertising or payment like PayPal. A lot of these services are taking exception to the messages that these people are kind of putting out there, and it's they always cry censorship. This is horrible thing, but it's what happens when you don't have kind of a designated forum. Instead, you allow private companies to say, this is our forum, you're allowed to use it, and it's free, it's very good, they extract data, so the upfront cost is deferred, you don't have to pay anything to be on it, you grow massive audiences, but at the same time, it's their platform, like you just said. It's completely under their purview, and if they wanted, if they looked at Ben and said, Ben, you are no longer allowed to use Facebook, go away, I would have no recourse. I could go start my own version of Facebook, but hey, that's life. That's the internet we have cultivated.
And where I think that you can see government pull into those platforms, and this has to do with security also, the security of of your own personal data, is I think that you can see that some of these companies should be broken up into smaller companies.
Yeah.
Google, for me, there's no reason why Google should also control YouTube. They should also control all of these other little companies that they control. Because it's like anything else, it's the 200-pound gorilla in the room. If you're going to start your own search engine company, great, but you may not. They may decide to not allow you to search through YouTube, or they might not allow you to search through other things. That is now what people require when they look at search engines. So when you look at those things, I think that is a secure thing, security thing, which government can step into and say, you know what? It's nice that you have this big company, but realistically, you guys can't all work together to stifle people coming into the marketplace and trying to compete. And that's one of the problems that we've had in IT for 20 years, is that whole mentality. And security-wise, I think that puts us in a vulnerable position. You end up in a situation where you have these large companies that are really kind of tamping down whatever they want to tamp down and increasing whatever they want to increase. And that's a problem.
And a lot of the ways that these companies, kind of branch out with these different arms, it looks like it's it's vertical integration. They really don't compete with one another. But like you just said, not a lot of things on the internet are not interconnected. And I'm kind of looking at Amazon with this one, where they run an online retail store. Great, perfect, whatever. But now they also are one of the biggest, if not the biggest, cloud providers on the internet. So if you are going to start your own online retailer and you need a lot of server space and a lot of traffic, room for traffic, odds are you're probably going to have to compete at some point or buy from Amazon to compete with Amazon. It's not it's not an easy thing to do if you want to try to compete on an even playing field.
And when you're talking about those type of situations, you have something on even on a more practical thing. If I'm selling stereos, for instance, and you're selling stereos, and you decide that you're going to give a little bit of advertisement towards selling stereos, and we're using the Amazon platforms, they can decide the winners and losers on their platforms, and they have every right to do that. But we all will have to understand that, and that's one of the things. If you knock me out of business, and say, for instance, if you say, okay, Sean's out of business now, me, Ben, I'm going to raise my stereos by double. What does that do to consumers? And that's one of the problems that you have with this stifling of competition that you have with these large companies. I'm not a big fan of, Amazon, for instance, having the ability to deliver things in 2 hours. It sounds nice, but to be quite honest with you, what is that going to do to local businesses? That's going to really, really be a problem for them. And I know that may sound really old school, but you can't. Machines are not going to pay taxes. They're not going to be the ones that are going to end up in a situation where they're going to, buy houses and do these type of things. And people need to understand. And I'm an automated type person. I understand automation. But there gets a point when you have to step back and say, is that really going to be beneficial for the country in general?
Yep, and obviously we have deviated just a little bit from security, but these are questions that I think everyone out there who uses these services, and luckily that's only everyone in the country, that you really have to start thinking about. But you're right. All right, so back to cybersecurity. I think that it's been a very good conversation, and Sean, I'll let you have kind of the last word here. Anything else that we didn't mention about advanced solutions, or anything in the news we didn't get a chance to mention?
No, I think that we covered a lot of diversity, but I think one of the things that we need to understand, whether we're talking about Amazon or we're talking about the Department of the Interior, is cybersecurity is across the board, and I can't reiterate enough that when we start to give all of our data, Amazon or Google or Facebook, we start to give them all of our data, that we need to understand that means our data is being held in one central location. When we talk about elections and we're worried about those being hacked, those are so decentralized, it's a little more difficult to hack those scenarios. When you put your data in a central location, it's not that's a big target. And that's where hackers target. So we all have to understand that when we start to give our data up to everyone, that's what we're doing, and we're only as secure as their weakest link. Right.
So, and one more thing I wanted to mention, and this is something that just kind of irks me. Recently, there was the big Apple thing, and they announced all the new products. They have the new iPad out, and one of these was the new iPad does away with the home button, same that the iPhone 10s Max or whatever, or all the iPhone 10s did. And they're only moving to Face ID, where essentially it would read your face. It plots like 30 some odd points, and it can identify one person from another. I don't really care if it's how accurate it is. Odds are someone's going to crack it with a picture here soon. But my concern is, you were mentioning the collection of data. What happens when these companies collect data and they have them on record and anyone can steal them? Stealing an email address, that's bad, and stealing maybe your password, also bad. But those can be changed. You can change your email address, you can change your password, you can change your IP address, you can change a lot. But you can't you can't change a fingerprint. You can't change those 32 points that prove that Ben is Ben based on his face without some serious plastic surgery. What do you think about data that can't be changed? Kind of like a social security number, but even that can be changed. What do you think about companies moving to data that can't be changed?
Well, when you run into those things, you run into a whole other plethora of security issues. If I'm taking Ben's face, then I've obviously have a copy of that face somewhere. Mm-hmm. Okay, so now I've got your name, your probably date of your birth, your where you live, your face, and so what makes me not think that I can't generate some type of a driver's license from that to go in and do something physically? See, that's where the rubber meets the road in a lot of this stuff, is that the big payoff a lot of times is the physical part of it, is that, okay, what can you get done physically with all the information you got? Can I go, rob your house? Can I go end up in a situation where I take your ID and I use your ID to go, steal a bunch of money and end up in a situation where people go, wait a second, but we know this was you, Ben, because here's your ID, here's your face, here's everything. Yeah. And so in that scenario, the more information that we hand off these people, and the more proprietary the information, the more likely it's that you're not going to get out if someone uses it in a bad manner, that you're not going to be able to improve it or to be able to prove it beyond a shadow of a doubt. If I've got all your information and your face, I go, okay, well, yeah, that was Ben for sure, because I see his face and I see all of his things. He presented a driver's license to me, and everything was accurate. Yeah. So, that's the problem that you run into. And I'm not a big fan of these large companies, I'll be honest with you, gathering more information on me. I'm just not.
They're moving, and I mentioned Apple with Face ID. That is now the new de facto. Amazon is doing it as well with their stores, that you just walk in, pick something up off the store shelf, and walk out of it, and it charges your Amazon account. Google does it, I think, with just all their AI. I think they do it as well. IBM is working on it. I mean, it's not just a problem of one company going too far. This is an industry that is seeing an inroad, and they're taking it by force. It's So.
Well, see, and I teach. One of the things I've done that I do is I mentor kids on IT stuff and security and stuff like that. And one of the things that I always present to the kids, because I think it's something that we as adults don't understand, and we need to understand also, is that a lot of times our ethics come after the creation of Frankenstein.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that I hope that our industry really pushes to do, is to say, ethically, what does this mean for us before we create Frankenstein? But so far it hasn't happened.
Yeah, it's and even beyond that, legislation happens way after technology. My favorite instance is, of course, the Google self-driving car, where they're like, "Hey, everyone, we drove 250,000 miles," and the government's like, "Wait, what are you doing?" And then they finally passed legislation after, essentially, I guess it's easier to ask for forgiveness than permission, and it's going to continue to be that way. I mean, technology has been, it's ever since the internet was invented, it's always been do whatever you want and then we'll react to it. And at this point, I don't see that changing, unfortunately. But I will say, before I get any more scared and I can't sleep tonight, Sean, thank you so much for coming out to Computer America. If people want to find out more about Advanced Solutions, or if you have any of your writings anywhere on the internet, where would be the best place to go?
Well, you can go out to advancedsolution.net. Also, one of our other companies is firedragonsecurity.net. There's some writings out there on security. And I think that you might have a link to it on your site, or might have had link to it on your site. I'm not sure. But yeah, there's some interesting articles. I think that a lot of the security stuff needs to be broken down for the average person to understand it, because, to be honest with you, unless you really are following security on a daily basis, it's difficult to keep up and catch up. That's one of the things. Always be mindful of what you do and how you do it, meaning where you leave your data and what you're doing with your data. And, every once in a while, if you want to really scare yourself, read a end-user agreement, and that'll scare you.
Yeah, and absolutely. So with that being said, Sean, it's been far too long, but it was a great conversation. And again, thank you for coming on Computer America. Sorry for keeping you late.
Oh, no problem. Anytime.
All right, have a great one, Sean. Bye-bye.
All right, bye.
All right, everyone, and there he goes. So, yeah, we are going to wrap up. I think we have time for just one maybe possible, just one maybe possible story, and then we're gonna, of course, say sayonara. But in the meantime, just checking out all of the different. Let me just check something out here, and yeah, all right. So, with that being said, let's go ahead and move on to computer and technology news, and that, of course, is brought to you by Computer America. So, here we go. And I guess for our one story that we're going to do, we're going to make you angry because the first one's scared. So I guess we're just going to go with the negative emotion motif that we have going on. This one, by Motherboard. Motherboard does great articles. They're very extensively researched, well-sourced, and I like this one. So the FCC, you may know them, Federal Communications Commission, falsely claims community broadband and a quote, ominous threat to the First Amendment. So, and this is by Motherboard, Carl Bode, saying that in reality, the real threat posed by community broadband is to big telecom's monopoly revenues. So, if you don't know what community broadband is, it's essentially where the infrastructure to make the internet, it's really not that complicated. Everything is very decentralized. Hooking into these networks, these large ISPs, be they Verizon, Charter, AT&T, Time Warner, who's now defunct, any of these other providers of internet, they manage servers, and they manage these connections that connect businesses and homes, and they're not the only ones that can do this. There are companies that are on a very local level that will put in the infrastructure. You pay usually a connection fee, and then you pay a monthly fee. Great for businesses. They can provide better, faster, or same internet for sometimes much cheaper, because you don't have to pay for all the overhead of paying for large monopolistic internet providers. And we saw the case that happened with Google Fiber. That was one that was not exactly community, but it was still smaller scale than some of these other providers that we've seen. We saw the one in Tennessee where essentially everyone in the community wanted to build this thing. They got signatures, they passed the motion through the local government, and then the internet companies, I think it was Verizon, stood in the way of Tennessee getting their community broadband up off the ground. Yes, a private company was telling a government entity what to do. It was surprising. So now we're back full circle here every couple of years, saying that the FCC has declared towns and cities that vote to build their own broadband networks an ominous threat to the First Amendment, which doesn't make sense but hey, let's see what how these claims were kind of made. So they said that the claims were made last week during a speech given at the telecom-funded media institution by the FCC Commissioner Mike O'Reilly, saying that in his speech, O'Reilly insinuated, without evidence, that community-owned and operated broadband networks would naturally result in local governments aggressively limiting American free speech rights, saying that, quote, I would be remiss if my address omitted a discussion of a lesser-known but particularly ominous threat to the First Amendment in the age of the internet, state-owned and operated broadband network, as if to imply that government agencies or even private companies don't use the ISPs that are existing as a way of censoring people's discussion. We have seen, the most notable would be internet companies scanning your internet usage, which happens all the time, don't get me wrong. In some cases, they even change the end user license agreement to actually, so that they could do this, much more securely. They scan your internet traffic to make sure that you are not file sharing, downloading movies illegally or anything else like that. And they will warn you and in some cases penalize you, and in other cases actually cut off your internet service if a private company, like let's say the person who owns the rights to, let's say Sony Pictures, if Sony Pictures tells you that you are downloading their movies illegally, they can have the internet provider take away your internet forever. And if you want to talk about a limit on free speech, taking away the internet as a form of discussion because a private company told another private company you are no longer deserved of this connection, that sounds like a huge step in the wrong direction. But hey, what do I know? I'm for local governments who vote on it and all agree to run and maintain their own infrastructure should be allowed to do so. But they said that, let's say the article says that more than 750 such networks have been built in the United States in a direct response to the lack of meaningful broadband competition and availability plaguing America. Studies have routinely shown that these providers are cheaper and better than broadband service in large areas. In large parts, because these ISPs have a vested interest in the communities that they serve. Everyone, I ran flat out of time. Thank you so much for joining us here on Computer America. I'm sorry the music didn't play, but everyone, have a great day. Thank you so much. Bye, everyone.